I'm gonna tell you a hard truth about yourself. It isn't sex you're afraid of. You can say yes or no to that. It's love. That's what you can't handle.
Hi guys, how are you all doing? It's been a little while since I posted one of these, and yeah, I don't know, it's just been kind of crazy, you know, with everything in the world. And normally I have some space to myself, just complete quiet, and because of everything that's going on, I no longer have just that complete quiet that I normally do. So you can probably hear, if you listen carefully, my cat is here with me. He's having a bath as we speak, as cats do. So I hope all of you who watch my videos, which I know right now is not very many of you, and that's fine, I hope you're all safe and doing okay with everything, because it is definitely crazy times, and I'm not going to go into that, but just wanted to let you all know I care. Well, let's talk about something more fun. I normally review for you guys a classic movie that you can watch yourselves. And today I'm reviewing something a little bit special. It's an American classic, but in the worst possible way, I guess. It's Peyton Place. So Peyton Place was initially a book written by Grace Metalius, not her real name, and it came out in the 50s, I think. Let me double check that, because there's originally a book, then a movie. 56 the novel came out. So Peyton Place kind of poked holes in the notion of the American suburban dream. So like the 50s, after the war, a lot of people sort of glossed over things, and there was this kind of veneer that everything was fine. And the author of this book was like, it's hypocrisy, like everything's just fake, you know? So this book takes place in a New England town. It's like a small place, I think it's meant to be. And it's sort of idyllic, you know, there's like the little church and the little streets, but what really goes on in people's homes is frankly, it's shocking. It's let me see, basically the book, possibly more than the movie, has 3 women, and we sort of follow them through their lives, but it takes in like a lot of people in the town as well. And while on the outside there's like, you know, the nice girl at school and whatever, like there's a lot of like poverty and hypocrisy. And by the end of this book, okay, there is, and I'm taking this off Wikipedia, but this is the list, okay? Social inequalities, class privilege, incest, abortion, adultery, lust, and murder. So it's quite a list. So basically, Peyton Place is kind of trashy and soap opera-y, but don't let that put you off, because it's also kind of great. So when Grace Metalius wrote this book, she had, I believe she still lived in the town she grew up in, and basically she wrote this book, and it's like an expose almost of her town. So everyone was like, oh, her name isn't really Grace, but they were like, oh, our little friend Grace wrote a book. Okay, so yeah, so she wrote this book, and people were like, oh, our little Grace, she wrote a book. And then they read it and they realized it was about them. A lot of what happens in her book, people were like, okay, that guy sounds just like you know, like the priest in your book sounds just like our priest, and your town doctor sounds just like our town doctor. I love that she changed her name as an author to Grace Metalius. Like, I don't know, Grace Metalius sounds like, I don't know, like a hairband from the 80s, or I don't know, it just sounds kind of funny, but it's not her real name. Yeah, so she wrote this book, and everyone kind of realized it was about them. And also, I think people really didn't appreciate her poking holes in, like, the American dream and saying, like, okay, like, for some of you, it's great, but the reality is, you know, life is life. It's not, it's messy, and I think a lot of the key thing is kind of that for everything to look fine on the outside, people have to often lie about what's happening inside their homes and how, like, not okay things are. So really kind of, she was a bit, like, brave, I think, to go out and publish this book. But it was a huge hit. Huge. It sold 60,000 copies in, like, the first week or something, and it was on the bestseller list. So it's kind of I feel like this book is an American classic in a way. In the way that Valley of the Dolls is a classic. It's like, or even like Hollywood Wives or something. It's kind of, it's not, it's kind of just enjoyable when you read it. You're like, oh my gosh, what am I reading, you know? It's very entertaining, basically. And it kind of dark, obviously, because, I mean, you had my list above of everything that's in this book. So yeah, it's quite out there for the 50s, but the fact that it was so brazen, I guess, just really kind of hit the mark with people. So I think the book was banned in some places as well. But yeah, the author had a bunch of death threats, and I think somebody threw a brick through a window and, like, stuff like that. So she had a bit of a rough time. I don't know why you would write. Well, I think for a while she tried to stay in the town that she basically wrote about, but obviously that was kind of maybe not the best idea. And amusingly enough, I was watching Murder, She Wrote, and I think in season 1, I could be wrong, maybe a completely different season. But anyway, there's an episode where a girl writes about everybody's secrets in Cabot Cove and just changes the names, and it's kind of like based on Grace Metalius. But basically, this book was so huge that Peyton Place became an expression for a situation that was like, you know, people sort of hiding scandalous secrets and gossipiness and stuff. So that's how big a deal it was. So from the book, there came a movie, which is where we're headed here. That came out in 1957, so not long after the book. And then there was later a, let me get this right, there was a long-running soap throughout the 60s of Peyton Place. There was also a second book called Return to Peyton Place, and I'm pretty sure that there may have even been a make of that. So I can't find it, but there you go. I would say if you're thinking about reading the book, it is good fun, and it is kind of, it was such a big deal in its time that it's a classic in that sense, but it's not like the most amazing, like, it's not literature, but it definitely has something. And I think I read it and sort of felt like, okay, you know, this book is kind of trashy, and I feel a little trashy now that I've read it. So, I haven't read the sequel, but a friend of mine who also loves Peyton Place, she's said to me, like, it's not very good. So I won't recommend that. But today we're talking about the film version. So it's just kind of amazing to me how much of a phenomenon Peyton Place was, and the fact that on the one hand it's got all this stuff that you weren't supposed to talk about, you know, and so it's kind of banned, and people are like, you know, it's a filthy book, and then literally it gets its own film, and everyone kind of watches this film, and it gets its own soap opera, and everyone's watching that. So obviously they sort of tone things down for the film, but it's all there. Like, I think they're a little careful about how they kind of show it. Like in the book it's pretty direct for the 50s, but obviously when you watch the movie it's a little bit more, I'm not going to say subtle because it's not subtle, but yeah. So the film, it's kind of like the book. It was directed by Mark Robson, and it had Lana Turner in it, and I love Lana Turner. She's got an amazing face, and she had a pretty amazing life too. She actually was, I think she was nominated for an Academy Award for this movie. So the big story with Lana Turner, if you don't know who she is, she was kind of a blonde bombshell. She was married to Artie Shaw, and I always feel like Artie Shaw needs his own little episode because he was married to like everybody. But she married Artie Shaw. She married Steve Crane twice, and basically she kind of ended up dating this guy called Johnny Stompanato. This story is like quite famous. You may already heard of this. And he was kind of in organized crime and was a bit of a not nice guy, and he started to become quite jealous and controlling, and obviously she was trying to work and live her life and be a normal person. And I think you didn't really get a lot of support and help around that back in the day. You probably don't now either, but I think back then it was really misunderstood. It was sort of like what happens at home stays at home, right? So one night he starts to threaten to kill Lana, and her daughter, who was 14, Cheryl, threw herself into the struggle and actually stabbed Johnny Stompanato to protect her mother, and he died. So she basically murdered her mother's boyfriend, and it's horrible, this poor girl. And it sort of came out in court. There's a bit of debate now about whether Lana Turner actually killed him, and her daughter just like said she did because she was so young that it would be sort of be able to be brushed over or whatever. I don't really have an opinion on, like, I don't know enough to say whether I think that's the case myself, but I just think it's such a horrible story, and it really, the media around it was huge, and it really shifted. It kind of brought Lana Turner into the spotlight in a negative way, and some of her next films kind of reflected how people kind of saw her differently, maybe as being like the kind of woman that dates a gangster, I guess. Yeah, so basically she's in this movie. That's where I was going with that. And I just think she's really good. So there's a lot of other people in this movie too. There is Hope Lang, Lee Phillips. I think those are kind of the ones that you would probably recognize. So yeah, it's quite similar to the book as far as like the sort of plot and the idea. To describe this movie, there's kind of, the movie itself is a little bit like a soap opera with like lots of characters, and there's kind of some central characters, but they're not, there's no like one protagonist. But generally, it's sort of, I think it starts in 1937 and covers a lot of Second World War kind of period. And there's the sense that like the older people who have positions of like respect in the town are kind of like want everything to be proper and have this idea of how things should be, like a moral code, you know, and they kind of look down on everyone that can't stand up to that code. And that's fine. But often in this, what you see in the film is that like there's hypocrisy in that, you know, and sometimes it's impossible to live up to that standard. Like one of the girls gets sexually assaulted by her father, and it's horrible. It is toned down a lot in the movie. Like, this movie is not as salacious as the book. I think if they made it today, it certainly would be, but they had to sort of gloss over things a lot. So it's funny to watch the movie after reading the book in a way. But so for something like that, it's not the girl's fault, but when she falls pregnant, everyone's like, oh, unwed mother, like trash, you know? And her dad is an alcoholic, so it's like, see, she was trash and now she's trash, you know? And it's kind of she's actually like a good person and hasn't done anything wrong, you know? So it's kind of, there's a lot of that in this movie of like, you know, people wanting to look down on each other and how that doesn't really, it's hypocritical. So there's a lot of plots here. There is I mean, as I said, there's like a suicide and there's a murder. I think probably the one I like, this sort of thread I like the best is the one I just told you about, because I really feel for this girl, you know, with like everything that happens to her. But all of the characters are kind of interesting. They all have something interesting. There's a woman who, and a lot of women used to do this, she got pregnant, but her she was having an affair with someone, so he just sort of gives her money and she just tells everyone, oh yeah, my husband died and this is my daughter and it's fine, I'm an upstanding citizen, you know? So it's like everyone's kind of brushing things under the rug. And this movie is kind of great for that reason, because it's like everyone has a secret, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of it's stuff that now, I guess, a lot of it you just wouldn't bat an eyelid, you know? It's very 50s morals. So it's like, I kind of watch it and it kind of makes me laugh. But I will say that the movie was a big success, obviously, because it had the spin-off, not a spin-off, it had the soap opera TV series that was really popular. But the performances in the movie are quite good. And it did get nominated for like 9 Oscars. I think it was 9. Yeah, so that's quite a big deal. So it's kind of an odd film. Like, I think mostly what I talk about, and you know, most of the films I sort of talk about here are classics, where I'm like, this is why it's a classic, and you know, if you like this kind of thing, you should see it, or if you're looking for something to watch, you should see it. But this time, this is more like, this is like a popular classic. You're not gonna probably find it in any, you know, it's not in 1001 movies you must see before you die, or, you know, it's not on any of the must-watch film lists, really. But in its own time, it was a cultural phenomenon, and to watch it now, it's quite quaint, almost. I don't know, but there's a real dark heart to Peyton Place. And I mean, that's the point of it, is that this kind of underlying darkness. So I wanted to share this movie with you guys because I read the book first, and watching the movie, you're kind of like, if you haven't read the book, the movie will still make sense and everything, but you'll kind of see that it's kind of, it feels fairly tame by modern standards, but yeah, at the time it was considered a little bit shocking. Yeah, and it's kind of, it's, I think the performances in it are quite good. Like, everyone's giving it their best, even though it's one of those things where you're like, this book is just this story and this idea, like, it's a soap opera. How is this done so well at the box office and everything? I think it kind of shows you that it really resonated with a lot of people at the time. The sense of, I think now we look back on the 50s as a time when, like, everything was great and everybody could afford houses and all this stuff, and it's like, that was just the veneer. Like, after the war, people wanted to believe in something good, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with sort of being positive, but there is something wrong with making people feel bad about things they don't have control over, that's not their fault, and that they shouldn't be judged for, obviously. So yeah, but I think the real reason people watch this movie or read the book or anything is not out of some sense of, like, I see myself on the screen, but it's really, you just want to be like, okay, tell me what happens, right? Like, these people, like, this happens, and then, she doesn't know that she's really an illegitimate child, and then you want to know what happens. You want to know, is this girl going to make it and have a good life, or is she going to ruin herself, or, is someone else going to ruin her life? And it really doesn't take much in that setting for you to lose your reputation, and for it to just be, your life is over, and suddenly a bunch of options are closed off to you. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a big gossipy kind of morass of a film. And I kind of think it's something where I could say a bunch of serious things about it, and those would be true, and that's fine. But a lot of what's great about this film is that, like, little kind of salacious edge, So that is Peyton Place. If you've not heard of it, I would say definitely give it a watch. It's kind of a bit of escapism, to be honest. So it might be a good one if you're looking for something to watch right now. Or if you're looking for something to read, I would say you can read the book. Either one. But obviously here I am, we're talking about movies, so I am talking about the movie. But yeah, and there's also the series. I haven't actually watched any of the series, but it had Mia Farrow in it. And like Leslie Nielsen made an appearance. Like, so at some point I'll have to look into that. Isn't that crazy? Like, Peyton Place launched Mia Farrow and like a bunch of other people. It was very popular. So Peyton Place, guys, definitely check it out if you feel like it sounds like a bit of a laugh, or even if you just don't think it sounds like a good kind of engrossing tangled web.